Hi, everyone, and a warm welcome to this month's episode of the Releasing the Real You show, where we talk about everything that's got to do with health, well-being, and how we can improve as a person. So today I'm really excited because we have a topic that is actually, in my opinion, very underrated, and that is sleep. However, if you have read a copy of my book or you have worked with me in the past, you know that sleep is one of the 5 steps of being the best person you can be. So with me, I have Maryanne Taylor, who's a sleep expert coach. And we are going to talk all about sleep and why actually it's so important. And potentially as well, and I'm sure we're going to touch on that as well, is why do actually people not sleep enough? So warm welcome, Maryanne. I'm really excited to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
And my first question to you is, what actually do you do? And more importantly, and which is always interesting, is how did you get into it?
Okay, so I am a sleep consultant. I now work with adolescents and adults with sleep problems, but I actually started off as a child sleep consultant back over a decade ago now. So I actually started off with my own non-sleeping babies, and I got very hung up on sleep or lack of. I've actually, previous to that, had my own journey with sleep. I had chronic fatigue as a young adult. And at the time, there was very little information around, very little support, and I was kind of a bit clueless about how to help myself with this chronic fatigue. And then, as I said, I had the babies. 2 out of 3 were not good sleepers. So I became a bit engrossed with the whole area, and I decided to train as a certified sleep consultant for children. Then I had a period of illness. I wasn't well. I had cancer actually, and that affected my sleep very significantly. And then I got well, thank God. And then menopause hit,
Yeah.
more sleep problems. So unfortunately, just because I'm a sleep consultant doesn't mean that I don't struggle with my
Of
own sleep
course.
at various points. It's not an exact science, so it's not that I sleep perfectly myself. There's definitely periods of time where I don't sleep as well. But just going back to me, so what got me here, I decided to train as an adult and adolescent sleep consultant and become certified to help adults more. And then I also trained with the NHS to become a CBTI, that's cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia therapist as well. So I incorporate that into my services. So that's
That's
me
really
in a nutshell.
interesting. Yeah. I mean, I suppose, people I've spoken to, some, struggle with insomnia, some struggle with not enough sleep because, they're too busy or they have young children. And it's really interesting. So what do you feel, though, are the biggest reasons that people do struggle with their sleep?
So that's a big question. There are lots of different reasons, and it may be that there isn't one specific reason why somebody's not sleeping, but it might be a smattering of a few different things. But I'd pull out a few in particular. So one I would say is stress and anxiety. That's huge when it comes to sleep. It's got what we call a bi-directional relationship, in that one thing really can impact on the other. So the more stressed and anxious we are, whether that be generally with financial worries or family concerns or anything like that, the more that's going to potentially affect our sleep. And the more sleep deprived we become, then obviously that increases our stress and anxiety levels. But also another layer of stress and anxiety around sleep. So it may not be just generalized stress. It might be that the more we have disturbed sleep, the more stressed we become about that in itself. So that's a really key factor for a lot of people. There's also what I would call the always on culture that we now find ourselves living with. It's this constant connection. We're connected non-stop through our devices, social media, emails, 24-hour news. It's just this constant on culture. And then it's often very difficult to let go of that and wind down. And we have this thing called bedtime procrastination, where we procrastinate, and we're addicted, many of us, to our screens. We're flicking for hours. Exactly. Yeah, look, here we are. We all have them not far from us.
Yeah.
And that's huge. That's huge when it comes to sleep, that on culture all the time, that it really impacts. And also it affects our melatonin. Melatonin's our sleep hormone that we need in abundance in order to help us get to sleep and to help us stay asleep. And because we're constantly switched on and our brains are constantly on the move, and so many of us don't actually allow ourselves time to wind down before getting into bed, that really affects our sleep patterns as well. We've got other things. We've got hormone changes with teenagers. There's a change in hormones for women. There's pregnancy, menopause, fluctuations in hormone levels also affect our quality of sleep and our quantity of sleep as well. So there's so many different factors. I could go on and on. We could spend the next half an hour just talking about all the different factors. I mean, I will also just throw out, I think it's important to mention, is about sleep hygiene. Now, in itself, sleep hygiene may not necessarily, if you're looking at different elements of sleep hygiene, it may not be significant enough as a standalone to improve somebody's sleep. It may be that there's a small little tweak that can be done and that would improve. But for the most part, especially people who are really struggling with sleep, it may not be that there's just one specific sleep hygiene. But generally, it is important to look at those things and our behaviors that impact on our ability to sleep. So the caffeine.
What do you call sleep hygiene? Is that a bedtime routine, or is that your environment, or what?
All of those. So a lot of different factors, the behaviors and the environment. So we've got the caffeine, for instance. We know that caffeine affects our sleep. I want to just flag up here what people know, the impact of caffeine, what that has on our sleep. But what is important to note is how long caffeine actually stays in our system. And it's longer than many of us actually think. So it's got a half-life of up to 6 hours. That means any caffeine that we take in, half of it's still potentially whirling around our system 6 hours later. So it's a really long time. So that natural dip that we all feel in the afternoon about 3-4 o'clock, in fact, round about now, then a lot of us then tend to reach for the caffeine. Yeah. And that can be a contributing factor. So we've got also the exercise. So either no exercise or exercise too close to bedtime can raise our cortisol levels, our adrenaline levels. All of that affects our sleep. Light is very significant when it comes to sleep. Our sleep-wake cycle is very much determined by light. So if we have too much light, if we're facing too much bright light in the lead up to bedtime, also affects our wind down. And if we don't have access to natural light at all, or any light, in fact, during the day, that will also affect our sleep-wake cycle. So all of these things can impact to a greater or lesser extent, I'd say.
So it's interesting you mentioned exercise, because obviously many working people would go, to the gym after work, or to an exercise class, or something exercise after work, because that's when they, organizational wise, can fit it into their diary. And you do mention that obviously it raises your cortisol, which it does. How much does that prevent us from a good night's sleep?
It can be significant. If it's too close to bedtime, then it can be significant. And especially if we haven't given ourselves enough of what we call in CBTI, and that cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, is that buffer zone. If we haven't allowed enough time for our buffer zone, in that allowing ourselves to switch back down again, lower the cortisol levels, lower the adrenaline levels, then that can actually really impact and affect our ability to be able to wind down to sleep. So it is significant. It also depends on what exercise. So if it's
Of course, if
yoga
it's
or something more
yoga or
relaxed,
something, it's fine.
yeah,
But if it is like going for your, I don't know, a run on the track, it might not be fine.
exactly. It's the high pace cardio, the exercise that gets your heart rate increasing, all of that can really significantly impact. So it is the timing. The timing is important, and if obviously it does. It's tricky when people are working full time and that's their only time. So just trying to just negotiate that a little bit. So as early as possible, and then build in some wind down time before getting into bed. So making sure you have that buffer zone after exercise and leading up to bedtime.
Yeah. So from your client and in general, how does lack of sleep or bad sleep affects us as people, or our health in general? What do you see are the effects of lack of sleep or a bad night's sleep? And I'll get to the next question in a bit. Yeah.
So I think I break this down into our mental health and our physical health, and it affects both significantly. So if we look first of all at our mental health, you know yourself, when you haven't had good sleep, whether that be as a standalone one
Grumpy.
night, 2 night, yeah, we're moody, we're irritable, as I mentioned before, the stress and the anxiety levels increase. We feel maybe less focused, less a bit able to concentrate, less productive, therefore our problem solving skills are affected. So all these things can really be affected if we're sleep deprived. Also, I want to mention here is about our memories. So when we sleep, especially in our deep stages of our sleep cycle, our memories get consolidated and we can sift through almost and pull out the important memories that we want to retain, and they get shifted into our long-term memory bank in the deep stages of sleep. And so if we don't have enough deep sleep, then that process doesn't happen quite the way it should, and then that causes us to maybe have less access to these memories. So when we talk to adolescents, and especially kids that are sitting exams, rather than what they naturally might do, which is to cram till the early hours, actually it would benefit them much more to actually park it and get that sleep in order to be able to retain what they already have. So that's the other thing, is the memories. And then we look at the physical health, and also in deep sleep our body makes the necessary repairs in order to be able to keep us healthy and keep our immune system strong. And that's what helps us fight off illnesses, helps us keep well. So if we're not having enough deep sleep, then that can affect our ability to be able to fight off illnesses. Also, we know that sleep helps our nervous system stay healthy. So over time, a lack of sleep can compromise our ability to be able to regulate stress hormones, and that can lead to higher blood pressure. And also, that lack of sleep can affect the hormones that influence our appetite. So when we're sleep deprived, the hormone doesn't get released maybe as it should to the levels that we want it to, and this then impacts on how hungry we feel. So it can lead to what cravings, commonly known as comfort eating as well. So we just tend to fall back on the comfort eating because our hormone has been affected. And the simple fact that if we're too tired, then we don't feel like keeping moving or exercising. Now, obviously, that affects our weight.
Or cooking.
Or cooking healthily.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah, making the right choices for sure.
Yeah, so there's a whole knock-on effect.
So how do you know, because I know a lot of people say, oh, I'm a light sleeper. How do you know if you have had enough deep sleep or not? I mean, I personally am very against all the watches and the apps and all that kind of stuff, because I feel that, one, you get obsessed by it. Second, I don't know if the information that you get, what do you do with it? And thirdly, as well, I don't like to have the the Bluetooth on at night. But so how does one know if you have enough deep sleep, if you don't have enough deep sleep? Like, how would you know?
So I totally agree with you about the tracking. I worry an awful lot about people who are very hung up on the tracking. And actually, there's a name for it, orthosomnia. But orthosomnia is somebody who becomes a bit obsessed with the whole tracking. So what I will say also, just to add on to that, is that the technology in a lot of these trackers, these sort of over the counter, I would say, trackers, is not advanced enough to be able to read the differences between light sleep and awake.
Okay.
But you need to go to a sleep clinic to be hooked up to a machine for that, to be able to read the differences, because they're actually quite subtle. So therefore, what the reading that people often see is just not accurate. And that in turn dictates how somebody feels. First of all, how they feel generally, but also how they feel about their sleep. So if they're seeing a reading and it says to them that they were awake, as far as they can see, between 3 a.m. and 5 a.m., then for them, that means that they have lost 2 hours of sleep. That means they must feel tired. So there's no room there for that natural process to happen, because they're very hung up on probably not very accurate readings. So that I totally agree with you in terms of the trackers. I really do not. I think they can fuel way more anxiety than anything else. In terms of how we know, so what I would say is that there isn't a one size fits all. And I want to just dispel this myth. And I call it the 8-hour myth, this assumption that we need 8 hours, roughly 8 hours of sleep at night. And I think that can be a little bit troubling. And I think problems really can occur when we're governing how much sleep we think we need based on what these sort of universal norms are telling us. It's a bit like saying that everybody should be 5'6", or everybody should be wearing the same shoe size. There isn't a one size fits all when it comes to sleep. And I think it can induce more anxiety than anything else if people feel that they haven't had what they should be having. And therefore that must mean that they're tired. And that then tells them that they're tired for that day. So if we're assessing somebody's sleep needs, so if somebody comes to me and I want to assess their sleep needs, the very first question I would say to them is, how do you manage your days? How are you in your days? Are you dragging yourself through your day? Do you have to put your head down on the desk, or do you have to lie down on the sofa? Do you have to do these things in order to get through the day, or not? Are you managing to be productive enough in your day? Are you managing to do the things that you want to do in your day? Are you having enough energy to be able to cook a meal for you, a healthy meal for yourself? And if the answer to that is yes, and that's on, let's say, 6 hours of sleep or 7 hours of sleep, or yes, but I have to have 9 hours of sleep for that, then those are your individual sleep needs. And I think it's really important for people to look inwards a little bit and recognize their own individual sleep needs, rather than assuming that they need to have this magic number. And if they haven't had this magic number, then it's a fail. It's not a good night's sleep, and so on. So that knock-on effect. So it's not the same. It's not a one size fits all.
It's very interesting what you're saying, and I 100% agree with you. The one thing I would mention is, and I've heard it before, which I thought was quite scary, is someone who said, oh yeah, I get 6 hours sleep and I'm perfectly fine. And then when you get into their food diary, you see the amount of coffee that they have. And so they feel perfectly fine, not realizing that actually it's the amount of coffee that they're having that is keeping them awake and making them feel fine.
Right.
So this is just a little thing I wanted to add to what you're saying is, it is feeling fine, being able to do everything without the need of having the coffee or the sugar or something else. Yeah.
And I guess it depends also what fine looks like to them. Is fine that they're buzzed, they're kind of frantic, they're jumping from one thing to the other because they're a bit over caffeined? Or what does fine look like? Is it actually fine? Or is it just, yes, I'm getting through the day and I'm sort of slightly frantic with it?
Definitely, 100%. And I just, it's such an important point. And that's where, having someone from the outside look at it and ask the right question will enable people to get that right, feeling of what they need. So a healthy sleep pattern or routine, what does that look like?
So again, I'm going to go back to there isn't a one size fits all here, because obviously different lifestyles and different stages of life and so on. So there's a few things I want to flag up here. One is, I would say sleep doesn't do well under intense pressure. So the more pressure we put on sleep, the more we then potentially cause ourselves a sleep problem. And I know it sounds slightly ironic, where you think, you lie in bed and you close your eyes and you think, I've got to go to sleep, and it doesn't happen. So I think it's important to remember that the more you kind of get hung up on sleep, the more you move away from that natural process. We all have the ability to sleep. So, the situation where people will say, I just don't. I just know I don't. I just know I'm not a good sleeper. That's just simply not true. Everyone has it's innate in us. We can sleep. We just, it's, first of all, I think it's about taking the stress out of it a little bit. So for instance, if you ask somebody what they do in order to get a good night's sleep, if there's somebody who struggles with sleep, they'll probably list you a whole bunch of things. So there's probably lots of pillow sprays and sleep teas and cooling pillows or warming pillows or whatever it is, that there's probably a list of stuff. Whereas if you ask someone who generally sleeps well, and I said generally because there's not a situation that we all sleep perfectly every night, but generally sleeps well, they won't really have much to say other than, I don't know, I just do. I don't know. I just, there isn't, they haven't really thought about what it is they do in order to be able to get a good night's sleep. So I think that's really an important point to take into consideration, is to try and move away from this kind of pressure that so many of us put on ourselves. However, that said, we can set the scene. We can make the sort of our environment conducive and our behaviors conducive to good sleep. So there's a difference between, I need to have a very structured, solid routine and follow it blindly to make sure. So I would say, and I mentioned before, and I'll say it again, is this importance of switching gear. So switching down from the busy activity of the day to give ourselves cues, we need cues. We need to give our body cues for, this is now the end of the active day, and we're now winding ourselves down for our evening and finally our night. So that looks like a bedtime routine of sorts. That can be that maybe a hot bath or a hot shower, maybe about an hour or so before getting into bed. And again, I'm being very vague with timings and duration, but a hot shower, hot bath in the lead up to bedtime can be really helpful. First of all, the cue, giving your body that cue, but also when you increase your body temperature, and when you come out of that, your body temperature drops, and that really is helpful in helping the melatonin, the sleep hormone, produce, which is what we want, because that's the hormone that's going to help us get to sleep and stay asleep. So that hot bath, hot shower raises your body temperature, and then afterwards that subsequent drop in temperature can be helpful. Calming activities, just allow it. And again, it's a lot about giving ourselves permission, because I think many of us don't. They think, well, we just haven't got time for that. We haven't got time to just chill and do nothing at all. But actually, you need to give yourself permission to do that. So making sure you have, whether it's listening to music or an audiobook or a podcast or some deep breathing exercises, just a little bit of calm stuff. What's also very popular is that mindful coloring.
Yeah,
it's fabulous. I've done it. It's really, really relaxing. Listen to some music or listen to a fun podcast, and that mindful coloring, these kind of things, is just helpful to wind down a little bit. Another thing that I want to just mention here is, if you are really struggling with the worries and the anxieties, and you feel that you're lying in bed and they're just taking hold, and there's no end. And so many people, that is the problem, is that they're lying in bed and the worries and the to-do lists are just coming and going at an alarming pace. And if that is the case, then a very simple tool technique that I often recommend is to fill in put the day to bed diary at some point in your evening. So write it down, first of all, not on a screen. That whole act of writing things down, seeing it visually in front of you, is a very, very helpful way of having your brain process that a little bit. And write, first of all, a quick mind scan, and think what went well in your day to day. So what positives can you take from your day to day? And it doesn't have to be huge stuff. It can be small stuff. It can be you had a nice lunch, you had a nice chat with somebody, whatever, however big or small. Then the next section I would put in what didn't go so well, what caused you frustration, what irritated you in your day. Again, doesn't have to be massive. It might be that you had a piece of work that you thought you'd get finished and you didn't, whatever it is that caused you some sort of frustration. And finally, a to-do list. And short-term goal, short-term stuff, long-term stuff, just put it all down. So while you might not have actually done the things yet, just this act of having it down on paper can just relieve this buildup of mental pressure that we so often build, and then we get into bed and start the processing then. And then really it's no wonder that so many of us do struggle with getting to sleep, because it's just there in the whirlings of our mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very similar questions that I ask my clients to do at the end of the day as well. What went well? What didn't go so well?
Yeah.
What could you have done differently? And once it's on paper, you don't have to worry about it anymore. So,
exactly. You just leave it, you park it there almost.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. When it comes to your physical environment, do you have any, and by the way, before we go to that, when you were talking, it really reminded me, like, and that's one of the things I often say as well, is, as babies, there's bath time.
Yeah.
And there's story time.
Yeah.
A bit of music.
Lovely.
Before going to bed.
Yeah.
And as we grow up, we've forgotten all that.
Completely.
Somehow. Yeah.
We've forgotten, and we also don't allow ourselves.
Yeah.
And we need it too. Absolutely. We need it too.
Definitely. So our physical environment, be it temperature, light, dark, smell. Obviously, I know lots of people, I never had any TV in my room, but lots of people are here, fall asleep while watching something or listening to the radio, or need noise to fall asleep.
Yeah.
Physical environment, what do you think about that?
So, yeah, I mean, I know this about the listening to the needing to fall asleep in front of the TV. I mean, it's not ideal. It really isn't ideal. However, if you are somebody that does that and you've got no issues with sleep and you sleep generally pretty well and you can manage your day, then okay, you know what? I'm not going to say, well, stop doing it then. I'm talking more about the people that are struggling with their sleep and they're trying this and they're trying that. So ideal, again, going back to it's our natural process, is try and bring it back to natural process a little bit. But within that, I will also say, so for instance, the noise, I just want to address the noise. If you are somebody and you're lying in bed and you're very hyper vigilant, hyper aware, switched on almost, listening for noise, and you're waiting to hear whether it's a young baby, you're waiting for your baby to wake up, or there's noise from outside the house, so you're just very super sensitive to noise, then I sometimes recommend using a white noise machine or a white noise app that you have on in a speaker in your room, not the phone next to you. That's another whole discussion. That's a podcast in itself.
Yeah.
That's a standalone. But having white noise, so it's a constant sound rather than different tone changes that come with the TV or the radio. The best type of sounds to use if you're using an app or a machine is a rough sounding constant sound, like the sound of a hairdryer or a vacuum cleaner. And incidentally, I'm not suggesting somebody sleeps with the hairdryer on in the background or the vacuum cleaner, but use an app if you need to.
Record it and put it on. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So anything like that, that's a rough sounding sound and with no tone changes, is that's really specifically if you are somebody that's very hypervigilant and you're sort of waiting for the next sound.
Yeah.
The rest of it, I would say, in terms of temperature, I would absolutely keep the bedroom on the cooler side, cooler than you would maybe find comfortable, and layer up with duvet, blanket, whatever it is. But our body temperature fluctuates through the course of the night. So we sleep in sleep cycles throughout the night. And within our sleep cycles, our body temperature fluctuates. So if the environment that you're sleeping in is too hot, then that will potentially wake you through your sleep cycles. Okay. So I would definitely say keep the temperature of the room something along the lines of around 18 degrees, something like that. And if necessary, layer up that way rather than increasing the heat. Mm-hmm. Light, very significant for sleep, very, very significant for sleep. So what we don't want is to have a situation where we're sleeping in a very bright environment, because that affects our ability to produce our melatonin, our sleep hormone. So trying to make the environment as dark as possible. Also, now the mornings are getting lighter, and if you are somebody that's struggling with early morning wake-ups and there's light coming in, too much light coming in, even chinks of light around the side, because some people say, well, there's only chinks of light, but when you're in a very light stage of sleep in the early hours of the morning, those chinks of light, if they're significant enough, can be enough to pull you into a wakeful state. So just making sure that there's not too much light coming in the early morning as well. Also, I'll just say about the environment is that it can, a little bit of decluttering in a bedroom, even if you're somebody that doesn't feel that it affects you or that you're bothered by it, you would be surprised and amazed that just a little bit of decluttering can just help just calm a little bit. So have a look. Go when you next walk into your room, go into the bedroom, have a look around and think, could I make this a calmer environment for myself? And if there's a little bit that you can do, I don't mean that you need to start shifting beds around and cupboards and all of that. But there's certainly, if there's just, the boxes or the whatever it is, that there's just little things that you can do to just make that environment of your bedroom feel like a calm, welcoming place. Because ultimately, that's really important, is that we walk into the place we're going to sleep in and not feel that we're ready for battle, which is what some people who really do struggle with insomnia do feel, that they have that sort of that ready to, right, here I go again, ready to get into bed and not sleep. And I think mindset is so important here as well. But I digress. But just a tad bit of decluttering can also make a big difference.
Yeah, definitely. Talking about napping. Are naps good? Are naps bad? Would you have that as part of a regular thing or not?
So not would be my answer to that. I think there are certain situations.
I love my nap, by the way. So that's
you love your nap. Oh gosh, so I'm gonna need to work on that possibly. Well, it depends how your sleep is. Do you nap and sleep okay?
Yeah, vote.
Okay, so then in that situation, absolutely be my guest. Go for it. If, however, you do nap, somebody naps, and they are struggling with their sleep, then I would definitely be really trying to cut that out. Just to give you a little bit of explanation on that, what happens with our sleep when we wake up in the morning, we start building up our sleep drive. It's called a homeostatic sleep drive. It's our drive to sleep. And it starts from when we wake up in the morning, and it builds and builds and builds. It's a bit like the steam in a pressure cooker. So when we're building up the steam, we're building up the sleep drive. And then when we get to bedtime, we open the valve of the pressure cooker and out it all goes over the course of the night, right? So the building sleep drive is the thing that's going to help us to get to sleep and to stay asleep. If you have a nap, and I'm talking about the people that have a nap that are struggling with their night's sleep, not you, then what's happening is you're opening the valve a little bit and letting off a little bit of the steam, a little bit of the sleep drive. So that means that by the time you get to bedtime, your sleep drive isn't at the highest point. And that in itself can be the thing that's affecting you being able to get to sleep or to stay asleep.
Yeah.
So
I mean, I don't have a nap every day, just not whatever, but I just, you know, for me, it's kind of a little bit of me time as well. That's how I've done it.
Yeah. I mean, if you are napping, I would say two things. One is I would keep it on the earlier side. So I would avoid napping mid-afternoon. So I keep it on the earlier side. But also I would keep it as short. So without going too much into the detail of the science of it, we sleep in sleep cycles and we transition from light sleep to deep sleep back to light sleep through our sleep cycle. What you want to do with a nap is to avoid getting into deep stage of the sleep cycle. So that said, I would say 20 minutes. For 20 minutes to keep a nap to around 20 minutes means that you get that light sleep, but you don't sink yet into a deep sleep.
Okay, that's a very good tip for sure. Definitely. So someone who wants to improve their sleep, what would be your top 3, maybe 5 tips to think about?
Okay, so I would say, first of all, a bit of a recap here. One is to evaluate what your own individual sleep need is, and to move away from this thought of, I should be getting this. But actually, and it's also very helpful to note this down. Keep it, track it, and put it on a sleep diary, whatever it is, but just note down how many hours of sleep roughly you get and how you feel the next day. And over a period of time, maybe 10 days, 2 weeks, you see a pattern and say, oh, I can see there that actually on 7 hours I do well. So sort of evaluate your own sleep need. That's number one. Number 2 is the downtime, the bedtime. We've mentioned it a few times, but I really would put it up there as a top tip, is give yourself permission to have that wind down lead up to bedtime that allows you to sort of ease into sleep rather than kind of pounce into sleep so much.
Talking about bedtime, is there a preferred time to go to bed, or does it not matter? So would it be 10 o'clock or midnight or 11 o'clock or 9 o'clock? Is there a...
Again, I would hesitate to give a time, because it also depends on what time somebody needs to get up in the morning and what their sleep need is. Okay. So if you've got someone that has to be up at 6 a.m. as opposed to someone that has to be up at 8 a.m., then their bedtime is going to look different. So in order to work out what your own bedtime would be, I would do the evaluation of how many hours roughly you need, what time you need to be up, what ideally time you'd like to be asleep by, and then work backwards with your downtime.
Okay.
I think that's quite important. But one thing I do actually want to mention here as part of my top tips that we haven't mentioned is regulating your pattern a little bit, your sleep pattern, your wake pattern, and also the timings that you eat during the day, your meal times, because we all have an internal body clock, our circadian rhythm, that operates over a 24-hour period. And because of our always on culture, many of us are actually fighting against that body clock, our natural body clock, which makes it all an awful lot harder, all of it. So in order to work with our body clock a little bit more in our natural process, you want to try and regulate the timing of things a little bit more. So try to regulate the times that you wake up in the morning and keep that across the board. And this is the slightly painful bit where people say, surely I can add on 2 hours at weekends. Exactly. Yeah. And for some, that's fine. But for other people that have difficulty with sleep, then really trying to pull that in a little bit tighter, that would be better, because what's happening there is you're operating almost in a jet lag situation every weekend. Imagine being jet lagged every weekend, which is part of what what might be happening, because you think you need to make up for what you haven't had during the week. So you add on an extra 2 hours at the weekend, and then your sleep is affected after that. So trying to regulate. Also bedtime, try and regulate bedtime as much as possible. There's always going to be times where you're not going to be able to do that and you're out in the evening, but as an overall picture, I would be trying to regulate those timings, and meal times as well, as you know, trying to maintain a regular pattern of meal times as well, and maintaining our blood sugar level.
Yeah,
so those,
obviously, otherwise you wake up in the middle of the night wanting to go for a wee or being hungry or things like that. So yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. Any other tip that you have?
I would say my the parting one I would say would be the pressure, the pressure, the stress, the anxiety over, am I getting enough sleep? I don't feel like I'm getting enough sleep. I feel like I'm this. I feel like I'm tired all the time. The tracker says that I'm not this and I'm not that. So let's move away from that stress a little bit. And there's a lot of different exercises that you can do in order to help yourself with that. The breathing exercises. And for some, that just even the words, oh God, breathing exercises, I'm not into that stuff. But very simple breathing techniques to just slow down your breathing and also just increase your focus can really, really help just bring down the stress levels enough to be able to help you feel relaxed. So just a very simple one is an equal breathing or box breathing, where you breathe in slowly, inhale for a count of 4, hold your breath for a count of 4, exhale through your mouth slowly for a count of 4, and hold for a count of 4. So this you can do anywhere you go, anywhere. You could be lying in bed at midnight or at 3 a.m., or you could be sitting at your desk or wherever it is. But it's just a very helpful way of just bringing your awareness a little bit to slowing down your breathing, and therefore increasing your focus a little bit and bringing yourself back to the present.
Yeah. So interestingly enough, I had COVID early December, middle December, and touch wood, the last 10 days I've slept okay. But since I had COVID, I had about 2-3 days of bad sleep. And I'm normally a perfectly fine sleeper. And then one night where I was so exhausted that I slept finally, but obviously never felt like I caught up on the few nights that I sometimes I felt, I struggled falling asleep, but most often it was I woke up at 2 or 3 or 4 in the morning, and that was it. Do breathing exercises help you fall asleep again, or is there something else that one can do? Because I totally understand for falling asleep, because it's relaxing and it calms you down and it slows you down. However, when you wake up at a stupid time, when you know you could sleep till 7 o'clock in the morning, what do you do then?
Okay, great question. So yes, doing a simple breathing technique may not cut it at that point. So there's 2 things I would say in particular here. One is, you mentioned about the looking at the time and checking the time. That can be very, very anxiety inducing for a lot of people around sleep, especially people who are up in the middle of the night. So number 1, let's get rid of the clock checking, right? So ideally we won't have the phone next to us, we'll have an actual clock. But whatever it is, move away from the whole time situation, because the minute your brain clocks,
oh my God,
clocks, excuse the
pun.
So
frustrating.
That is it. And then you start doing the mental calculation, right? Oh God, if I go to sleep right now, then I'll have only 5 hours left. And so, yeah, I would be absolutely moving away from the timing. The second thing, and this is actually one of the basis of CBT for insomnia, CBTI, that's often used now for insomnia patients, is rather than lying in bed, tossing and turning and waiting and willing for sleep to happen, is actually not to do that at all, and to get up. So to avoid the lying in bed, and I call it the 15-minute rule, but when I say 15 minutes, I really talk about 15 minutes as an overall picture, because what I don't want is for people to then clock watch and go, right, I'm nearly at 15 minutes. That's the last thing I want. So what feels like around 10-15 minutes, if you're trying to get to sleep and you feel really quite far away from sleep. So there's a very big difference between lying in bed at 3 a.m. and feeling quite relaxed and dozy and that sleep may come soon, and or feeling completely wide awake, worried, anxious, I'm not getting back to sleep, right? So I'm talking about that one, the latter. If you are feeling that, you get up and you get out of bed. Now, in terms of what you do and where you go, first of all, I would have had a pre-prepared space. So ideally, it would be out of your bedroom completely. If that can't happen, then at least on the other side of your bedroom, with a comfortable place to sit, whether it's a nice chair or a beanbag or whatever it is, a dim light. So rather than having to switch all the lights on, a nice dim light, and something ready to do there, something relaxing. Have a book ready there, or headphones to listen to something, or back to the mindful coloring, whatever it is that's nice, calming and relaxing. And you stay in that space until you start to feel sleepy again. And it may be that you start to yawn or you feel your eyelids getting heavy. And only at that point, I would be taking myself back off to bed. But to really avoid that excess tossing and turning, because also what we're doing here with that situation is that you're building up an association, and probably subconsciously, of the place, your bed, as the place that you don't sleep well in, especially if this is a regular situation and it's happening a lot of nights a week. Then subconsciously your brain is clocking this place as the place you don't sleep well in. And in order to move away from that and to weaken that association, you need to spend more time in your bed actually sleeping rather than tossing and turning. So that would be my absolute top tip in terms of middle of the night, is taking yourself up out of there to a different space completely, and only going back there when you feel that sort of heaviness where sleep is starting to come close.
Okay, fantastic. Great tips there for sure. If someone wants to have more of a chat with you, what's the best place to get hold of you?
So my website is actually in the process of update. There's still children all over my website, but that will be updated soon. The website is thesleepworks.co.uk.
Okay, all the links, by the way, will be in the description of this episode anyway. So
okay, fine, yeah, and LinkedIn as well. So we'll put all the links there. That's fine.
Yeah. They'll be all there. So website, email, LinkedIn, those are the three best places to get hold of you. Fantastic. Well, thank you very much for being a fabulous guest on the show.
Thanks for having me.
I find always sleep is actually a massive topic that is so underrated by everyone because of our always on culture, for sure.
Exactly.
Not realizing that, so many different things do affect our sleep, not just our lifestyle, but what we eat, our hormones, our stress and anxiety, and everything else that's happening in life. And then the other way around, it affects so many other things as well.
Exactly.
Such as our health, our well-being. So it's a massively important topic that we need to talk about much, much more. So to everyone listening, thank you for listening in. And if you haven't yet listened to previous episode, go back, listen to all the topics that we talked about, and subscribe to the channel, because lots of more episodes are coming up very soon. So have a great month, and I'll see you all very, very soon. Let's find a button to stop the recording. There we go.